we'll crack on now. Just obviously our times are a bit limited. We've got a drop dead just before 5 o'clock with other meetings and things going on then. So we may not need that long, but we'll see how we go. My name's Mark Saltmarsh. I'm the National Player Pipeline Manager at the RFU. I know many of those people on the call, but some new names and faces, which is great. And also joined Mike Hart, who is our Schools and Colleges Manager. Thanks, Mike, for giving us a wave. And also John Lawn from the RFU, and John's leading on the project itself around tackle height evaluation and our head injury concussion work as well. So welcome, John. Thanks for your time as well. I'd also like to just highlight we've got Pete Chapman on the call. Pete's ECRFU board member, and as we've talked about, really close link between ourselves at the RFU, ECRFU, and AOC Sport, who are represented by Andy Perliewski. Many people know Andy. Matt Hinchley's on the call, and Sarah Cochran as well, all from the AOC Sport team. Very much a joined up intent and to be involved in the evaluation. So we're all here to listen in and contribute where need be. So welcome and thanks very much for joining. Just a very brief couple of minutes of context from me, first of all, and then I'll hand over to John. So really the first thing I wanted to do was just highlight really a bit of the why and why we wanted to get involved in this work. And you'll be aware, I expect, having signed up for the call, that there are two key elements of the work around tackle height evaluation and changes to the regulations for next season. The first one is that the whole of the age grade game comes in line with each other, basically, that our maximum tackle height is the imagined line of the armpit. It was different between the older ages and the younger ages. That is now all going to be the same at armpit level rather than shoulder height. So that's our change, and that will take place across the game, and is already coming into the regulations from the 1st of August. The other piece of work, which is the main bit we're here to talk about today, is also a piece of work around evaluating the tackle height and looking at potential changes to the laws that may not, it's exactly what we want to investigate, change the incidence of head injury in the tackle situation in the age grade game. And obviously really massive piece of work at the moment, completely around player safety, really key pillar of our strategy as a game and as an organisation, as the RFU, going forwards, is to try and make sure that we're keeping players as safe as possible, and we are focused on the whole concussion piece to start with, and John will give us a bit more context to that. As a triumvirate, if you like, partnership of three organisations, England Colleges, RFU, and AOC Sport, we felt it was really important that the college game was right in the vanguard of supporting this work and making a real statement about its importance to the future of the game, and also wanting to help shape that. And we kicked it around a fair bit between us, some of the pros and cons and opportunities and challenges of doing this work, but absolutely came out on the side of really wanting to be proactive and taking the college game into this evaluation, to make a statement about the importance of the college game, as I say. And certainly the age band, both boys and girls at 16 to 18 is where the evaluation is taking place, and of course that is right in the sweet spot of where we are from a college rugby perspective. So we had a real feeling of being positive and proactive about being involved in the evaluation, and wanting to take the vast majority of our competition framework with us on that journey over the next season, and to really contribute to this evaluation trial. So I'm going to hand over to John. As I say, if there's any questions at any point during what any of us are saying, please put them in the chat. We've got those ones that you've sent in already, and we'll start with those once John has spoken. But John, who's leading this work and has done a great job in influencing and getting some fairly difficult customers at times, John, in the government system to help us out and be part of this, has done a great job. So over to you, Lornie, and yeah, then we'll get into the Q&A after that.
Thanks, Mark. Afternoon, everybody. So I'll just take us back to late 2019. So there was a group formed to look at the I suppose the increasing profile that was being placed on rugby, and certainly rugby in educational settings. You may recall Professor Pollock at that time, and calls to ban tackling. So a group was looking at introducing some trials across the age grade game in the 2020-2021 season. Due to the pandemic, obviously those trials were put on hold. And then I guess what's happened more broadly then in the rugby world is, again, there continues to be a lot of profile and scrutiny around concussion and head injury. And in particular, a phrase I'm going to use quite a lot is around head impacts. And there's much more knowledge now around not just what's the impact of concussion, but what are the impacts, what is the impact of multiple head impacts in a player's lifetime. So back in February, late February, early March, a group was pulled together, which was quite unique in that it was made up of representatives of the community game and the professional game. And you may have seen a press release, I think it came out last Thursday or Friday, around some changes that are going to be introduced in the professional game. So we are playing our role in a bigger piece of work across not just English rugby, but I would say world rugby as well. So Mark has referenced the lowering of the armpit, lowering of the tackle line to the armpit, and I think most people are in agreement that that's a pragmatic and sensible next step. However, there is an indication that further changes may also have a really positive impact on reducing the number of head impacts that players are exposed to, which is why we're looking to introduce this evaluation. So what would be involved in the evaluation? Well, we're targeting the 16 to 18 age group, mainly because our previous injury surveillance suggests that that's when injury rates tend to accelerate in the age grade game, which you will all recognise. It makes sense as players become more physical, go through maturity, better quality coaching, more time on task in terms of build up a certain amount of familiarity with the game. So injury rates tend to go up there. So what we're looking to do, well, we're looking to introduce a game that would see the tackler restricted to tackling around the navel height, belly button height. We wanted to try and make the tackle, allow the tackle to be made both below the waist and immediately above the waist. So trying to preserve those two soft tackle areas. And that was done for a couple of reasons. When we did some game analysis over the last, when we could play rugby back in 2018, 19 and 19, 20, over 60% of tackles that we analysed were around the torso. So they're the dominant form of tackle anyway. Players are either around the legs or around the torso area. So sort of below the upper rib cage is where most of those tackles take place. So hopefully players are quite familiar with that type of tackle. The second thing we wanted to do though was to also try and, I'll use this phrase a couple of times as well, try and take two heads out of the same airspace. So it was very much around trying to restrict the ball carrier from dipping suddenly into contact and putting two heads in the same airspace. So that was very much one of the things we wanted to do. And again, that was led a little bit by our game analysis, where in over 70% of tackles, the ball carrier was classified as in the upright position anyway. So you can see that these are the behaviours that the players are adopting anyway. That it's the type of things that they do on most occasions. And so clearly that's where this came from. We're looking at around 1,200 games. We wanted those games to take place in both the college and school settings and the club setting as well. We wanted to try and give ourselves a broad range of matches across a range of different environments, so we could start to understand if there was any significant difference across those environments, and also to give ourselves the best chance of engaging with us, of many people such as yourselves who can also give us really important feedback. Because I must stress here that one of the things we recognise here is that this could, in theory, make the game safer. So it could reduce the number of concussions, it could reduce the number of head impacts that players are exposed to. But we also recognise at some point we need to speak to the players, because they may say, actually, yeah, it makes it safer, but it's not a game that I want to play. So we do have to have that in mind. We've recognised that's really important, that the players' view on how this may change the game for them individually is quite important. So that will form part of this evaluation, gathering the views of the players as well as the views of yourselves and coaches, etc., and referees. So I'll probably stop there for a moment, Mark, if that's okay, because I'm conscious I've thrown quite a lot. And I'm not saying we go to necessarily the questions that were submitted in advance, but are there any questions or clarifications on what I've said at this point? No. Okay. So just to I suppose set the context then in terms of where we are at this moment. So we wrote obviously to yourselves via Mark, and we've written to all the geographical CBs, and we had 18 of our county boards who signalled their interest immediately. Subsequent to that, 3 have withdrawn. So we now have sort of 10 counties that have confirmed that they would like to take part, and we have another sort of 5 who are currently sitting on the fence and or consulting. So that's where we're at this moment in time. We most of the expressions of interest have been directed towards the boys' game. So we are actively seeking some more girls' competitions where we can identify them. And I appreciate this won't necessarily have much relevance to this group, but we think that in the club game we may look to go under 15s in the club game for the girls if we need to, just to give us the right level of insight into how it impacts on girls rugby as well. But that's to be decided with the various county boards that we'll be speaking to. Okay. Shall I revert some of the questions now, Mark? Is that going to be helpful, do you think?
That'd be great, John. If we can look at those, that'd be really helpful. Mike, do you want to go through them, or John, did you want to take them in a certain order?
I'm just going through them all now, or do you want to?
Yeah, you can, Mike. Yeah.
Is that all right? Makes it easier, doesn't it? Okay, yeah. So
yeah,
got a few here that were pre-submitted. So actually, it links quite nicely to what you've just finished then around actually targeting some more games for the girls. So actually, someone's just asked about, should we not consider the same rule for the top female performers like we are considering for the ACE? Of course, we're not going to put this across in the ACE programme because, of course, with the link with the academies. Whereas we've said we're going to cover this across all the women's performance. So someone's just asking, because some of the women players will play across in the Tyrrell's Premiership, should we not consider that?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a real mixed bag, if you like, of competitions put forward from across the country to take part in this. And I must admit, initially I was thinking that, do you want players who may be playing in more than one environment, i.e. in academies or wherever that may be, you know? But there's been some really strong arguments put back the other way. So there's one CB, they're going to put forward their under-18s, their Premier Division competition. So what they've done, they've been working with the coaches, identified the quality of coaching and said, actually, we have a better chance of doing this properly in these clubs because they're better coached than some of the lower level competitions that they run. So I'm very much sort of, this sounds like I'm sort of sitting on the fence here, Mike, but I'm very much leaving this a little bit to the people who are probably closer to it than me. They probably know what those players are capable of, and what their players' playing programs look like as well. So I am a little bit indifferent at the moment, Mike, to be honest with you. I have a sense, it's only a sense, that many young players are pretty good at adjusting between sports and are pretty good at doing that. But I'm also mindful that, you know, in the heat of competition, sometimes thinking clearly is not always that easy. So I am conscious that it could be a challenge for some players to remember which particular laws they're playing to in a certain game or competition. So that's
John,
really
we did question. We had a conversation between the 3 organisations on this, and we were trying to look at where we felt the best consistency was for the player. but bearing in mind what you've just said, obviously. And we felt that whereas in the Ace League, there is a much bigger program. There's, overall there's something like 60 odd games in the Ace League that are played. So it means that there is a large amount of rugby that those players are playing, which would be alongside a large program of academy rugby as well. Whereas the number of players in the top of the girls' game in colleges is relatively few who are also playing out in Premier 15. So that was the rationale, that it was a small number of girls who would be playing in that environment as well as the Premier 15s, whereas the numbers in the boys' game who play outside in performance level rugby is far greater percentage as well. So that was the rationale behind that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. And then I've got 3 questions all into one. So I've got some great questions from Speedo here. So it's basically around the research. So what research, if any, has been conducted in the age grade game in terms of injury epidemiology or injury field of study?
Yeah. So I guess for us, Mike, the youth rugby injury surveillance project was introduced in, I think, 2017-18, and it's run every year since. Obviously there was a fallow season in the season just gone, and all the data there is freely available. So I can certainly make that available to everybody if they want to look at that in a little bit more detail. In terms of the research, it's probably behind where it should be or where it is in relation to the men's game. You may have seen that there's a similar study currently taking place in New Zealand at the moment. They're doing this in the under 15 age group, I think it is. And something that I've not talked about, but I'll reference now, we are hopeful of trying to replicate an element of that study that's taking place in New Zealand by including instrumented mouth guards in this. So obviously we wouldn't be able to provide an instrumented mouth guard for every player, but the idea would be to try and secure funding so we can purchase 300 of these instrumented mouth guards and allocate them to certain players who are taking part in this evaluation, so we can start to get a better understanding about the physical forces that they're experiencing when they're playing the game and when they're training. But that's sort of to be confirmed, because these things are quite expensive. So yeah, and then just more generally, around the research piece, we are at the moment probably responding more to the looking back type thing. We get the surveillance, we start to understand where injuries are caused at different stages and ages of a player's development, and we react to that. Really, this is probably one of the first times we've really tried to get ahead of that and tried to get an understanding of, okay, so if we make these changes to the laws, what might the impact be against that baseline of, the data we've got from previous years.
Cool, sounds good. And then the next one actually is on around the head-on-head and collisions. So when did the current literature start showing that head-on-head collisions started to become the highest incident rate for concussions?
Yeah, so we have just over 3 years of injury data available, and it's been consistent across those 3 years. This is the age grade game, should I say. The tackle is the event that's associated with most injuries. 60% of and linked to that, 60% of concussions or reported concussions occur in the tackle, with a greater incidence to the tackler. Now, I think what's been meant by the question is what we do know is that when an upright ball carrier and an upright tackler collide at pace, that is where the most serious head impacts will occur. Imagine 2 cars going down a road and they hit head on at pace. So that's what we mean by that. That's the really significant impact we're trying to take out of the game. There are lots of chest on chest tackles, and thankfully heads don't clash and there's no obvious concussions. But as I mentioned earlier, the phrase I use is head impacts, and we're now looking at the whiplash type movements of the head and neck, etc. as well, which is why, if I'm honest, if we could get the instrumented mouth guards as part of this trial, it would give us that little bit of understanding about what are those physical forces that a player's head and neck are experiencing. So I hope that answers that a little bit, Mike, in terms of what we meant by that head-on-head collision stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the next one you kind of covered it with, in terms of actually saying that we'd take player feedback. So there's a question around that we conducted this in the championship and then it was stopped halfway through, wasn't it? I know you've had this question before as well.
Yeah, it's not strictly true that it was stopped halfway through. It was stopped after the group stages. So there was the semi-final and final, and the group that were evaluating it took the decision, along with I think the championship clubs at the time, to suspend the trial at that point, because the sort of data that had been collected, that was deemed as adequate for what they were trying to do. I think there's a couple of headline points to take out of that championship trial. So lowering the height of the tackle meant that tacklers made contact with the ball carrier's head and neck 30% less often, which was a positive. But it didn't in that particular trial. It didn't influence the concussion incidence rates that much. But what they started to see was tacklers in the lowered tackle height setting suffered more concussions than did the tacklers in the standard tackle height setting. And again, I see that Kendo's on the call. He may have been involved in that, and I think there was a suggestion that there was probably a few incidents where the tackler got concussed because the ball carrier saw that as an opportunity to dip the shoulder and lead with the shoulder and carry lower into the sort of, if you like, the set tackler. But that was a suggestion that I understand came out of that. One thing I would say, if I could, Mike, just adding on to that, some of you may be aware that the French have introduced the waist-high tackle in their community game just over a couple of years ago. They saw a couple of deaths in their, I think, their sort of academy football, so they brought this in their community game across the board. They took a lot from our championship tackle height trial. So again, they've done like what we're proposing. They said that they wanted to see the ball carrier stay more upright to allow those tackles to take place, in their words, more safely. And I can report back a little bit more at the end on what they're telling us about what's going on in their study.
Okay, great, thanks, John. And then there's a couple of technical bits now around actually. In the paper that Mark sent around, it's mentioned about the dip. So how is the dip defined? And then there's a bit about referees, but we can go on to that in a minute.
Yeah, so can I try and take those two together, Mike?
Yeah, so if you got the referee one, so it's about how it will actually be refereed, won't it, and actually penalty and so on, materiality.
So it's very much, materiality, absolutely, contextual judgment. So it's very much around, we'll be instructing referees to look out for, and if necessary, to penalise a sudden or late movements by the ball carrier that result in a direct contact with the head of the tackler. So I guess an example would be if a ball carrier signals their intention and carries the ball low, that gives the tackler time to adjust, so they can then adjust. And in theory, there should be no need to penalise. In a similar way, if you think about a scenario where it's close to a goal line, where you may see a pick and go type movement, we would say, well, that's play on. That's a normal running position, as in, the ball carrier is bent over to pick up the ball. They are moving forward. That's permitted, and that's the same in the current game, Mike, where there are lots of occasions, if you slow down those incidents in a game, there's quite a number of head-on-head contacts, but there's very little momentum involved in those. It's more of a wrestling contest. So again, the instruction to referees there would be that's play on. What we're worried about is if I try and demonstrate the scenario sort of verbally, two number 8s lining up against each other in midfield off the top of the line out. They're both going at full pace. So we want to try and avoid that upright head on head, but equally we want to avoid that one of them's ready to tackle, this player's going upright, and at the last second thinks, right, I'll just dip and target the ball carriers, the tackler's head or neck. Those are the scenarios where we're trying to avoid. But again, I'm going to refer back to the French example, what they've been able to share with us. They saw an increase in the number of penalties in the first 4 to 6 weeks when they introduced it, as you would expect. And there's people on here who've been involved in law changes previously, taking the player out in the air, the scrum engagement, tipping the jumper in the line out, etc. It generally takes that 4 to 6 weeks for players to to learn to change their behaviour. Some learn it in the first week, some are a little bit slower on the uptake, and it takes a few more weeks, doesn't it? But we expect to see the same trend in this, if I'm honest, Mike, where it'll take a while. But I am going to acknowledge, it's going to be a challenge for the referees. We're really keen that the referees take more of a developmental stroke coaching approach and use the time to talk to players and to remind them of their responsibilities in this particular game, what the laws are, and try to avoid penalising unless absolutely necessary. We don't want this to become a 20 penalties plays 20 penalties game. It's very much around having a quiet conversation with the player. I noticed your tackle was a little bit low, a little bit high there. I noticed you dipped a little bit late. Just think about this and just try and encourage the players to do the right thing, adopt the right behaviours. Does that answer that for you, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's good. And I mean, it's just Rory's just asked around. Actually, if we banned hands in at the ruck, would this help reduce concussions? So it's a different.
Yes, that's a real good question. Mark will know this. We were discussing about whether we needed to look at the ruck, and World Rugby have actually made this a bit of a priority for them at the moment. And the announcement on the global law trials, for those that have seen it, will say they're going to offer some guidance around the sort of ruck area, in particular jackal and the crocodile roll. So we left that to them at the moment. I'll be honest with you, Mike, I need to study what they're communicating in a little bit more detail. But that is another area, and maybe this group needs to think around this more longer term. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny, not just around the tackle, but around the immediate aftermath of a tackle, so the ruck, in terms of what players can and cannot do. Because again, that's probably the next area where the players will be exposed to a number of head impacts, and we've all seen the neck and shoulder injuries that players can have. But if I was a betting man, Mike, I would say that the referees will be instructed to clamp down pretty hard on anything that resembles a crocodile roll this season. Will be my assumption on this.
John, can I just chip in? Sorry, Mike. John, can I just chip in on the refereeing piece? One of the things that certainly has become quite clear in some of the other conversations is, because this is about law, the referees are really close to it. And actually, you're working very closely, aren't you, with the referees union and societies on a briefing and a training program for referees and coaches to help people to develop this if they're going to referee themselves, or to work with the referees who are going to work with them as well, which is a really key point, isn't it? That it's sort of everyone in it together, rather than it becoming a bit of a guesswork game.
Yeah, absolutely we are, Mark, and we do want to work together to provide some joint coach and referee development opportunities. And I guess when we do this away from competition, actually coaches, referees, players, they all actually get on quite well, and they're quite inquisitive in each other's roles and stuff. I guess it's more of a plea, isn't it, that we're asking people, if they choose to take part in this, that it's about showing some patience in the initial weeks, I would suggest, where we start to work through this. There's probably got to be a more positive and proactive certainly a more proactive conversation prior to the game and after the game, to understand what works and what didn't work. And because we're going to try, we're desperate to try and learn from this. In terms of what people, especially what the players are experiencing. Is it fundamentally changing their experience of the game? But equally, do the players come off and actually can they tell us that, yeah, I feel safer in this game, or I feel less safe, or it's not the game that I signed up for? It's very much about getting their views as much as what the data is telling us as well.
That's right. And then Andy, I'm not sure if you've seen it, John, but Andy put something in the chat around he's seen a lot more incidences around the hip and the knee. I know you had that with some of the CB questions, didn't you? Yeah.
I guess the response there is that that happens in the current game, Andy, and I guess, this sounds like the blunt answer I given back last week to a CB was, well, we probably need to spend a little bit more time looking at a player's technique and their ability to make a range of tackles in different situations across the game, really. And there might need to be a little bit more recognition that possibly defence is not stop the ball carrier at all costs. It might need to be stop the ball carrier in a safe and effective way, which means don't shove your head in front of the knee. Some players do it because, you know, they choose to do it. They're prepared to put their own health at risk. Others do it because of a lack of technique, I guess. I guess as coaches, and I'm a coach, that, you know, sometimes we've got to remove a player from the field for their own safety and say, you know, I'm not prepared to put you on the field because you haven't yet learned the technique of making a safe, effective tackle.
So, Mike, that's all the questions received beforehand, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's everything from the chat as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. If there's anything else in the chat, please put that in. Just to sort of confirm the scope of what we're talking about from a college's point of view, we're really keen that the vast majority of games that are in that new competitions framework that we put together and trailed with you a number of times are involved in this trial. And it amounts to, you know, well over 500 games that happen throughout the season between colleges in the joint AOC Sport ECRFU college comps program, and so, you know, really keen that right from those most accomplished players to those players who might be starting out are involved in that, and that's part of what John talked about earlier. Real variation in the experience and ability of players is really important as part of this trial evaluation as well. So we're talking about all the levels really, from the men's premier downwards, and in the women's program right through from the performance level down through the progression festivals and to the sevens program as well, adopting and playing to these adapted rules for the evaluation. And the aim would be for that to start off at the beginning of the program in September, and then we go forwards through the season. And clearly what we're doing at the moment is working with John, who's mentioned those other CBs, constituent bodies and counties involved as well, for where those games would be evaluated, etc., and how that assessment and evaluation would work, because clearly we're going to rely on the teams themselves, the coaches, the college to provide feedback and injury data as well. So that's our intention, is that you know, right across the college game, we're playing to these changed rules for a year to really contribute to the evaluation. I'll pause there as well. I don't know if there's anything, Pete, from an ECRFU perspective, or Andy from AOC Sport perspective, you would want to add to that last statement about the scope of what we're talking about.
No, I think you covered it all there, Mark, really very comprehensively. Okay.
Thanks, Pete. Andy?
Yeah, and from our point of view, obviously, once we get the method of getting the information back for colleges, we will circulate that to all colleges so that you know what's expected of you in terms of providing the feedback.
Great, thanks, Andy. So, any other questions at all, John? Anything to add from your perspective?
I just to say thank you for giving up your afternoon to speak with me, but just to find a little bit of detail. Clearly, what we'd need to do as well, we'd want to try and run injury surveillance alongside this. So if you're signing up for this, your team or your college, we'd want you to submit injury surveillance data. We've got a couple of ways of doing that. So as and when we know that you are intending to sign up, we'll put you in touch with the University of Bath, who are leading on this research, and they'll go through all the consents with you in terms of player consents, your consents, and obviously then we would look to play that information back to you at various points in the year, and certainly at the end of the evaluation, so you could see if you like an injury deck for your particular college, but also for the group of colleges. So it might be a useful source of information for you as well. And then the other thing we do intend to do, I mentioned game analysis, and we may be asking if it's okay that we may want to come and capture some footage from some of your fixtures. So we want to film some games, probably bring 2 or 3 cameras in to get multiple angles at multiple levels, so we can start to continue to develop our understanding of the tackle mechanisms that are involved, and what tackles look like, and where injuries are happening or not happening more than anything. So hopefully that would be okay as well, Mark, for for those colleges that were taking part.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah, I think everyone would value that type of information. We don't usually get, so I think there'd be some real value for everybody in having that available for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Mark, can I ask
Yes,
a question?
go for it. Yeah.
For everybody on board as well. Some of the colleges that are linked into this here and other colleges as well may be entering the National Schools Cup. Will that be involved in the trial as well, or is that outside the trial? Do we know that yet?
It's going to be outside the trial. Sorry, Mark. I think it's going to be outside of the trial, isn't it? The National Schools Cup. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, our challenge with the Schools Cup, Pete, is that of course because it's a knockout, half the teams only play 1 or 2 games in it. So it's that comes back to that whole consistency of rugby again. So we know that the teams will go all the way. Will play a number of games, 8 rounds. I think those that would get to the final. But of course the majority wouldn't. So it would be the exception to the rugby they're playing rather than the core of the rugby they're playing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I will do, everyone, and you may well have seen this, but I'll put in the chat just when we finish the document that we've put together between ECRFU, RFU and AOC Sport in terms of this piece of work. So I'll put that in the chat in case you haven't seen it. And please do share that with colleagues as well. That's not a secret document. It's certainly the 2-pager to promote why we're doing what we're doing and what it's all about. So please do share that. And I guess the final thing, if there's no more questions, is a huge thank you, because we know obviously most of you are now beyond the end of term, on your summer holidays, and we know a number of people couldn't attend for that reason, which is one, why we've recorded this session, and 2, why there will be at least 1, if not 2 more of these just before and at the start of the new term as well. We'll make sure we're into that period to really support people, and with some of the things that John has talked about from a coaching, refereeing and competition perspective. And as Andy said, we'll make sure we've got the information that supports that from an AOC Sport entry point of view and all those sorts of things as well. This won't be the last one of these. We're definitely very aware that we want to get as many people briefed as possible, and when we're coming back to college, August, September time, that's when most people will be available. So we'll be back again out to do this and make sure everyone's got the information and the support to actually implement it as well. John, thanks for putting that in the chat there. I will also add, as I say, the link to the paper that we've put together now. I think that's us now. John, appreciate your time. I know you've been doing plenty of these across the last few weeks to varying degrees. This is probably one that you've had more people on, haven't you? Because it's been a bit spread on some of the other ones as people work things out. But thanks very much for your time as well. And also just from me, a thank you to our colleagues at ECRFU and AOC Sport. This definitely is a real combined piece of work between the 3 organisations. And as I said at the outset, we all see it as a really important area, because it ultimately is about keeping our college players as safe as possible now and in the future playing our game. So thanks very much everyone for your time. Really appreciate you giving up your holiday time, and please do keep in touch if there is anything at all that occurs to you after this and you want to raise that with us, then use the colleges@rfu.com email address. We'll monitor that and get back to you, and we can make sure we get some good answers to questions that come through on there as well.